So I'd like to introduce Chris Hawley, who will be speaking first. Chris is as a city planner in Buffalo, New York, and since 2009, he's worked with the Buffalo Office of Strategic Planning, where he is currently the Historic Preservation Planner, and he has helped shepherd into adoption the Buffalo Green Code, a city-wide form-based code and FBCI Dry House Award winner that went into effect in 2017. He previously worked for U.S. Senator Charles E. Schumer and Buffalo developer Howard Zemsky, and possesses a degree in urban design from New York University. So Chris, I'll have you take it away, and then when your presentation's up, I will introduce Bernice.
All right, hello everyone. Can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. I'm just linking in my presentation there. All right, how's it looking?
Good.
Good, fantastic. Well, it's too bad I couldn't be in Maine this time. That's one of the things I was really looking forward to, and the reason I eagerly accepted the invitation. But I'm just as happy to do this presentation online. And so we'll be talking about zoning today. And I already got a pretty thorough introduction, but thank you very much for that. True, I'm the historic preservation planner for the city. The first 8 years or so of working at the city of Buffalo, I was mostly involved in writing our new zoning code, which was adopted in 2017. And I've also done some consulting work for other municipalities in Western New York, including a code I'm very proud of and will be focusing on in Olean, New York. The Buffalo Green Code was a comprehensive code rewrite, complete from scratch reconstruction of the code that was initially adopted in 1953 and had grown to 1,804 pages, was impossible to use, was one of the worst conventional zoning ordinances in the country. And threw that in the trash bin, started over with an entirely new citywide form-based code that includes a number of really innovative features. So we're really proud of it. It's been producing some good results over the past few years. We're a very different city than most of the places in Maine. Maine is a state of towns. And so I will be incorporating some lessons from Buffalo and the process we got to adopting the code, but also be focusing a bit more on an example I think is more applicable to a lot of the towns throughout Maine, which is a code I'm even prouder of in many ways, because I was able to do everything I wanted with this code. I wasn't able to do that so easily with everything in the Buffalo code. But I'll be focusing on the downtown Olean form-based code, which we adopted a couple years earlier than that in 2015. So to give you a sense of what Olean is, it's the largest city in Cattaraugus County. It has about 13,000 residents at a historic high of 22,000. It was an oil town, has a lot more in common with cities and towns of northwest Pennsylvania than it does the cities of western New York. It was complete with a tank city on the edge of town, grew most of its wealth from oil production in the early 20th century, saw a substantial decline, but is now seeing some revival. In 2010, the city, led by citizens, undertook a process to reconstruct their main street as a complete green street. This is North Union Street going through town. One of the two tallest buildings in the city off to the left. They also undertook a massive effort to reclaim historic buildings throughout their main street through a National Register Historic District, which has made available historic tax credits. We're now seeing a lot of economic development activity. This is the kind of second leg in the stool of their economic development strategy. And the third leg in that stool, public realm, historic tax credits, and the third is the form-based code, which I was involved in with Chuck Bannis Design, a good friend of mine here in Buffalo, who is also a very talented illustrator and graphic designer, produced a very beautiful code, in my opinion, built on the lessons of Buffalo, but with an even greater degree of precision. So I'll be focusing more on Olean in this talk than I will on Buffalo, although I'll be sharing examples from both. So first, what in the world is a form-based code? I didn't want to assume that everyone knew what that was, but the first thing I like to say about a form-based code, that it's actually not about zoning. What it's really about is reinforcing what you love about your town and seeing less of what you don't love. We've seen a lot of conventional suburban development, even in the heart of our historic towns and cities over the past 50 or 60 years, much of it enabled by conventional zoning laws and reinforced by automobile-oriented infrastructure. but form-based codes are uniquely adapted to getting back to the form of development we seem to like in America, again, our walkable cities and towns that are being rediscovered one by one all across the country. But on a technical basis, a form-based code is different from a conventional code in that it is expressly designed to enable walkable places. It's not a terribly useful approach if you're attempting to create a conventional suburban environment, but it is uniquely capable of reinforcing and rebuilding, or even building from scratch, the walkable environments we were more familiar with a century ago. So, and it employs, unlike conventional zoning, form and character as its organizing principle. This is the Buffalove Code from 1953. It had grown to 1,804 pages long, almost entirely composed of text, full of formulas that were designed to bring a suburban development pattern into the heart of the city. It might look very similar to the codes that many towns throughout Maine may still have, but was uniquely ill-suited to creating the development results that people in Buffalo wanted. A conventional zoning code, which really came into its greatest maturity in the 1950s and 60s, unlike a form-based code, its organizing principle is separating uses, limiting density, and mandating off-street parking, in a nutshell. Very different priorities than we see with form-based codes. And the results of conventional versus form-based codes are very clear. On the left, you have a standard strip plaza in Maine, which is legal under most zoning codes in the country, and probably was 100% in conformance with the codes that were in place when this was built in suburban Maine. And on the right, we have a typical urban environment. I can't remember if this is Augusta or Portland. I think it's Portland. But this is illegal under most zoning codes adopted throughout the country. The mixed-use, intense, human-scaled, walkable places that we were incredibly skilled at building a century ago are non-conforming with most of the standards that exist in conventional zoning codes. And that is one of the reasons that this movement in the past 2 decades has been for reforming zoning codes to accommodate the walkable places that we once knew how to build so well. So in this presentation, I could spend 3 hours going through every possible reform that you could incorporate into your zoning code. But I thought, well, here are the top 10 things you can do to reform your zoning to encourage more walkable outcomes. These are the 10. Emphasize walkable design. Measure your town. Illustrate your standards. De-emphasize use. Don't worry about parking. Support transportation alternatives. Legalize the neighborhood shop. Populate the public realm. Consider the light, which I'll explain later, and steal from the best examples. So we'll start with emphasizing walkable design. When I first came to Olean to do some work down there, one of the things I showed an audience of downtown stakeholders were a series of early 20th century postcards. And as a way of illustrating what our cities were once like, this is Old Orchard Beach in Maine. I wanted to do an entire presentation just on postcards in Maine. I couldn't decide which ones to include. This is Booth Bay Harbor, absolutely incredible. Winthrop, Maine. Old Town, Maine. I mean, we built places like this almost instinctively. Stonington, Maine. I mean, it's clear that Maine has some of the best small-scale urbanism anywhere in North America. And I know much of this has survived. Some, of course, as we typically see throughout the 20th century, has been lost. But the really important thing that, and actually the proposition I made to Olean and I would to others, is to look at your old postcards and then look at your zoning code and your comprehensive plan and compare them and see whether the old images in the postcards are able to be built today under the rules you have in place in your town. And if they aren't, then it may be time to reassess what your zoning says, particularly if you really want to get back to what we knew worked well in the 1920s and are restoring our towns one by one. The other thing about conventional zoning, because it focuses on so many of the things that simply don't matter in recreating the walkable places that we once built so well, is that they focus on things like parking and density and floor area ratios, things that just don't have any real relevance to the historic character and pattern in our communities, and leaves form and character of our town basically out of the picture. And what I like to say is that the form and character of your town or city are simply too important to be left to chance. This is an image we showed the Common Council in Olean as an example of Main Street development that complied with all zoning requirements in their town. This is a pretty standard CVS pharmacy, fake windows in the front, even the doors are fake. All access to the building is from the rear. I think there's just an emergency exit on the right. And this lines a street of historic Main Street buildings like we see all across America. But this went through the same city planning board review process, the site plan and design review, and met all zoning requirements, all parking requirements, met everything in the book. And clearly it's not an outcome that they were looking for, but is a great example of the kind of conventional suburban development that codes not only enable, but in some cases legally require. So what I'm asking folks to do is consider zoning as a tool for emphasizing walkable design, for incorporating the patterns of development that they like in their neighborhoods and village centers, and make those part of the rules in your code. And we'll get more into that in a little while. Second, measure your town. One of the things that was deeply frustrating to me in assessing Buffalo's 1953 zoning ordinance is that in looking at Tucson, Arizona's zoning ordinance, which I learned through newspapers was the model for Buffalo, is that they were basically exactly the same. Zoning codes were adopted as a template and churned out in one-size-fits-all forms in cities that were very different from each other all across America, and imposed in rural, suburban, and urban centers alike as though they were the same thing. And in fact, city planners' goals in the 1950s and 60s, and up until the early 21st century really, was to adopt a suburban car-oriented development pattern in virtually every section of the country. And we're quite successful in doing so during that whole period. But what we started with, and what I would urge any community to start with in a place like Olean or elsewhere, Buffalo too, is first study and measure the place. Before we did any kind of analysis of the zoning code in Olean, we first undertook a downtown character study that went through every single historic building that people said they liked in downtown Olean and measured every physical characteristic that contributed to the walkability and workability of the place. So we measured lot dimensions, area, width, and coverage, building setbacks, front, corner, side, interior, and yard and rear, building height, the number of stories, the height overall, the ground story height, the finished ground floor level height, the level above the sidewalk, how tall that is, the level of transparency, the percentage of the ground floor devoted to windows and doors, same with the corner side, the upper story, the windowsill height, another important factor in determining the transparency of a building. Access, where is the main entrance location? How is vehicular access, if provided at all, accommodated? The number of off-street parking spaces. And optional, but useful, particularly in Olean, was the architecture, building materials, the type of encroachments that exist. And also, of course, typical signs, the number of signs, sign type, and sign area. Went through every single block of downtown Olean and created a full catalog measuring the physical qualities that made Olean a great and eminently restorable place. There's a great example on East State Street in downtown Olean, which is now under construction. But anyway, the purpose of this was, and I have to say that a very good zoning code should be designed like a finely tailored suit for the existing and desired character of your community. It should never be template driven. It should never simply be cut and pasted from other codes. Citizens should be able to understand the reasons that codes and regulations are put forward. And when you could explain it in terms of the existing character of places they say they already like, it's much easier to get to a point where those standards adopted or can be adopted when they're based on the physical features that people are familiar with. So that downtown character study was really key as a consensus builder. 3, illustrate your standards. So you've already got your finely tailored suit. You know what your community is all about. You know how to measure the urbanism of the place. The next best practice in any form-based code, which conventional codes are typically ill-suited to do, is to visually communicate that character and the community's vision in graphics, tables, and illustrations that are set up like an instruction manual for how to build your downtown or your city or your town. The best form-based codes do this exceedingly well. This is an example, 3 pages from the Downtown Olean form-based code. The way we put it forward was almost like an IKEA instruction manual for building downtown. It should be as simple and straightforward and graphically accessible as possible so that citizens, not just lawyers and architects, can understand what's required. Oftentimes, you have business owners who simply want to have the easiest path forward, and when you can give them an illustrated guide, it just makes everything a lot easier. A good practice in a lot of the best form-based codes is to visually illustrate a plausible development outcome in the zoning standards that are applied. And this is one of 2 examples. We had 2 zones in the Downtown Olean Code. This is an example of the kind of development that would occur if the form standards were applied 100% of the time under healthy market conditions, showing the types of buildings that exist and their physical characteristics following the code over time. We also designed a neighborhood center code for them in a very small part of downtown, but also designed to gradually be mapped in other neighborhood main streets in Olean over time as there's political will to do so. This is a lower scaled zone of buildings of no greater than 3 stories in height. And this is, when we talk about a form-based code, I think sometimes people get intimidated by the notion of there being objective design standards that are applied by code officials uniformly across a zone. And one of the easiest ways to get over that roadblock is to communicate it visually. And one thing that both the Buffalo and Olean codes do very well is it illustrates the form and dimensional standards of a building from empty lot to fully articulated building in a simple 2-page spread. And this simple 2-page spread basically tells you most of the things you need to know in order to get the basic urban box for a neighborhood main street or downtown. Everything from lot dimensions and setbacks to building height, transparency, and pedestrian access. So this is the how-to manual for North Olean Street in Olean. An optional element, which Olean wanted to be consistent with its National Register district, were a series of architectural standards. And those 2 had to be graphically depicted. And the reason the graphics, I think, are so vital is that, particularly when talking about the language of architecture or urban design, there are things that are described in architectural standards that can be very difficult to communicate without graphics. So what the heck is a transom? What's a console or corbel or an expression line? What is a parapet? Not everyone knows the answer to those questions. So illustrating those things are really key. This is an example. It's one of about a dozen projects that have come through the pipeline since the Downtown Olean form-based code was adopted in 2015. And a particularly good example because in both of these cases at 217 and 219 North Olean Street, the ground floor shop fronts were virtually destroyed and had to be reconstructed from scratch. And the developer here, a small business person that was able to put a few pennies together to do this rehab, was able to find the Downtown Olean form-based code highly instructive and helpful in helping him understand the kind of storefront that was needed on the ground floor. So this renovation is wrapping up and I think is a very good example of the outcomes of a good code. And we've heard some testimonials from folks in Olean about how well this works. To simply have the standards illustrated as a guidebook, it's demystifying, according to the business leaders in Olean. And it was really helpful and even inspiring, I think, to many of the small business people to be able to show them what the community's vision is in a really beautiful and accessible document. And Jeff Belt, who is one of the leaders to get the form-based code in downtown revitalization underway, also thought it was really helpful in preventing ugliness that can be discouraging to other investors. It's unhelpful when you don't have rules in place that help reinforce the investments that people want to make that are widely embraced by your community. And having high standards is not a disincentive to investment when you are the investor making a beautiful building with your savings or with the gift of an investor. Number 4, de-emphasize use. So the principal focus of a form-based code is design and using design in order to make uses more compatible with one another, using design as a method of making mixed use easier to do. And this does not mean, and as is often commonly assumed, that use is ignored or set aside or that uses aren't addressed at all. That is hardly the case. But what a form-based code often does is de-emphasize use and also make use standards a lot more accessible and easy to understand. So this is a copy of the use table in the Buffalo Code. Before this, we had in the 1,804 pages of dense legalese, some 584 specifically identified uses in the code that were allowed in some 24 different zones in the city. Very few of them were defined. You couldn't find those use standards all in one place. And we were able to basically set that all aside and put basically all of the use standards in a summary on a 2-page chart that lists the uses that are allowed. We've reduced the number of specifically identified uses to 86. For a complex city, that's pretty good, with the 20 zones across the top, and then helpful, as you can see on the right, cross-references that are clickable in the document to sections regarding use-specific standards. Now, a form-based code is also, of course, designed to be a lot more flexible with regard to use. And they're easiest to apply in existing urban areas, certainly. But just as an example of the inflexibility that we've encountered in the past few years, is that, the 1950s and 60s view is that industrial uses should be physically separated from residential and even regular commercial areas. And a lot of towns obviously figured out that that was a problem when it came to craft industries such as brewing, which is probably the most common type, coming into our towns in neighborhood main streets and village centers all across America. And many cities recognized they had to adopt their codes to facilitate these new uses. But it's important to be flexible with regard to use and to focus your attention on design. Now, one provision in the Green Code that I'm really proud of and I think could be applicable to a lot of cities across Maine, and this is an example, the Kennebec Arsenal in Augusta, Maine, which I thought was really an applicable example, is what we call the adaptive reuse permit. Now, Buffalo is a city that's seen a tremendous amount of decline over the past 50 years, so we have dozens of vacant churches and schools. We have also another asylum that's been adaptively reused. And sometimes these are buildings that are just too large and too unusual to neatly fit within a set of zones with a uniform development pattern. They're different. And in Buffalo's case, we adopted an adaptive reuse permit to help facilitate the adaptive reuse of buildings that are either listed as local landmarks or have been determined eligible for or are listed on the National Register of Historic Places and are over 5,000 square feet in size, to apply for any number, a huge range of uses that normally wouldn't be allowed in a zone, and particularly in residential zones. So something to check out in Buffalo if it's useful to add this degree of flexibility so that applicants do not have to go through a series of use variances and controversy to adaptively reuse buildings that typically require a lot more uses than are typically allowed. And just as an example, this is Bangor, Maine. Our cities were a jumble of uses, almost chaotic, and they were wonderful. And we have to pay attention to what worked well in those communities and emulate the best examples. Our zoning codes should facilitate the kind of intensity and diversity of use we used to have in those places. Jane Jacobs is a personal hero of mine. I think every presentation I ever make includes a Jane Jacobs quote. Lively, diverse, intense cities contain the seeds of their own regeneration. One of my favorite lines from Jane. Lively, that means congested. Diverse, mixed use. Intense, density. All those elements are needed for a town to become vibrant and whole again. Number 5, don't worry so much about parking. Buffalo was the first major city in the country to completely eliminate all minimum parking requirements. I think it's the most progressive and an important reform in the code. And we decided, and I would propose to anyone who wants to decide this matter is, do you want to be more like this? A great small town intensely develops in Maine, or do you want to be more like the Macy's parking lot at the Maine Mall? What you may be surprised to find is that the minimum parking standards that were applied to the Maine Mall are likely very similar to the ones that apply to places like this, even still. Now, a lot of towns throughout the country have made progress, at least in removing minimum parking requirements downtown. But I would say that this is a great model for development in older places and newer places alike. And it is made impossible by minimum parking requirements, which require any business, any developer, any residential project to incorporate a minimum number of parking spaces on site around their buildings. Just kind of close your eyes and imagine every single one of these buildings with 2 or 3 buildings around it demolished for parking lots. That's what our zoning codes typically call for when applied to existing places especially. And it's impossible to create this fine-grained human scale density and mix of uses if you also had minimum parking requirements. So for both Olean, at least downtown Olean, and the city of Buffalo, we decided that parking was not as important as rehabilitating vacant buildings and creating great infill development in our older neighborhoods. We removed probably the biggest regulatory barrier to economic development in our city by eliminating all minimum parking requirements, making it possible, as one example, this is a project now under construction in the Allentown Historic District in Buffalo, to build infill projects and adaptively reused buildings while accommodating only as much parking as a developer or business person thinks he or she needs. It's provided the freedom to reclaim our neighborhoods and rebuild them in ways that would be familiar to people perhaps in the 1920s. So this was the first project to have 0 off-street parking requirements, the first of a few now in Buffalo. It contains 12 dwelling units, a ground floor shop, and 0 off-street parking spaces. And it'll work out just fine. The sky won't fall. In Olean, a place where there isn't nearly as much transit access and where car dependency is significantly higher, this project, the tallest building in downtown Olean, was held back for years because of minimum parking requirements that would have required significant demolition nearby. There isn't even a place to put a parking spot on this site. It occupies 100% of its lot. And as late as 2014, this long vacant building, vacant since 1997, sat waiting for a developer. And as late as 2010, the city reluctantly rejected a proposal to rehabilitate this building for a mix of uses, but would have also required demolishing everything on the right of the building. But now this building's under construction, a mix of residential and restaurants and banquet uses, and in a city of 13,000 people in rural New York State and the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, we have a project now that has 0 off-street parking spaces and a rehabilitated building in progress in a place that isn't a big city. So it can work just about anywhere. Now, parking is still important in terms of design and location. So what your code should focus on is how parking, when it is provided, is landscaped, screened, and how it is placed relative to a building. And in a neighborhood, main street, or village center, behind the building is best. 6, support transportation alternatives. Instead of minimum parking requirements for cars, consider basic parking standards for bicycles. The best bicycle parking standards, I think, anywhere in America is actually in New England. It's in Burlington, Vermont, which we use extensively and incorporated into our code. So consider that. It's very easy to put out a few bike racks or a bike storage facility in a multi-family or mixed-use project for long-term storage. And incorporating those standards isn't so as expensive as requiring off-street parking. If you're really bold, you might even consider requiring new projects in particular to adopt transportation demand management strategies. We did this in Buffalo. We had a much more basic approach to this in Olean. But basically, this would require developers to consider the other ways that people might access a building aside from single occupancy vehicle travel. Things like ride sharing, telecommuting, accommodating public transit, charging for off-street parking and not making it a free amenity on site. This is typically incorporated into a site plan review process. It's something that's worked out very well for us. It may work out well for you. But if you just get rid of minimum parking requirements, you're already kind of 90% of your way there. This is simply an added bonus. One thing Buffalo also did was they incorporated with a single line guidance on how to deal with the public realm of streets and public spaces. And this could be a simple adoption by your public works department, but in our case, we thought it was useful to adopt by reference 2 incredibly useful guides that are an alternative to the standard AASHTO Green Book of suburban conventional design that are typically applied by traffic engineers in suburban and rural areas. So in this case, the ITE Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares Manual and the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide are now part of our zoning code. And when a street is reconstructed, newly constructed, or reconfigured, it goes through the same review process that a large-scale development project would in our city planning board. And it's an innovation that has been helpful to our public works department in getting feedback from citizens. But these are the guides that are used as a basis for review. Buffalo has long had a policy to do complete streets, and now it has a policy on how to do complete streets. So form-based code often incorporates both standards for the private realm of lots and buildings, and also for the public realm of streets and public spaces. And we included a series of illustrations that are directly derived from the ITE Walkable Urban Thoroughfares Manual that describes how streets should be designed to accommodate bicyclists, pedestrians, the mobility impaired, and transit riders. 7, legalize the neighborhood shop. Now, what do I mean by that? This is a neighborhood shop, I think, outside of Augusta. We found it in a local newspaper. It is an example of the pre-zoning development pattern that's commonplace in towns and cities throughout the country of small-scale stores that existed in non-Main Street contexts. Buffalo has hundreds of these. Many of our neighborhoods were developed before the Model T was even invented. And it's very commonplace for corner shops, not always on corners, but very often on corners, to have popped up within walking distance of people's homes. And there is a section in the Buffalo Code that I'm particularly proud of because it has resulted in this flood of small-scale economic development. Standard was to allow for things erected before 1953, when our code was adopted, to be resurrected for any number of commercial uses that would easily be accommodated in a historic building. It's a tool for economic development and an important component in the walkability of a neighborhood. This is an example, a corner storefront in a completely residential context, recently rehabilitated for a Tipico coffee house, had been vacant for as long as I can remember, maybe for as long as the zoning code was in effect, but is now a vibrant urban space in the middle of a residential context. And actually, I will be becoming a developer with Bernice's guidance very soon, rehabilitating a long vacant corner tavern. I'm taking advantage of the code I wrote for myself in a residential context on Buffalo's industrial east side. So there's no other commercial development around it. It's an old pre-prohibition tavern that somehow survived the decline of the neighborhood and city and will be rehabilitated by Dingus Day of 2021. 8, populate the public realm. We heard about this in the discussion already, but even in our super duper progressive code in Buffalo, we noticed regulatory barriers that made it hard or slow to erect sidewalk cafe enclosures, to extend into the parking lane, to extend into the rear yard for parking lots, made it difficult to open outdoor markets, which may become increasingly important in the age of social distancing. These are major regulatory hurdles, but even with our super duper progressive code, the city of Buffalo is suspending all formal review procedures for outdoor uses, not just restaurants and bars, but any retail use that might want to take advantage of outdoor display or conduct services outdoors, such as a salon or barbershop, in favor of a much more streamlined administrative process that doesn't require any review by the city planning board or common council. So I would advise looking through your code and making sure that those regulatory barriers are addressed. And I think the most exciting part about this crisis, because we should never let a crisis go to waste, is that there's already talk about making some of these improvements permanent beyond the current social distancing period. Number 9, this is one of my favorites. Consider the lights. This is something that isn't often considered in zoning codes across the country, but which was highly emphasized in both the Buffalo and Olean codes, which is the impact of artificial light on the night sky. This is a particularly egregious example of Strip Plaza in North Buffalo, which was 100% consistent with the zoning code in effect, lit up like a prison yard, and but perfectly legal under most zoning codes across the country. Most zoning codes have few, if any, standards on lighting, but there's a very simple way out of that, and it doesn't have to be all that complicated. Buffalo standards are a bit more specific and lengthy, but for Olean, which had a small staff of development review folks, we incorporated very basic standards. Basically, that all new lighting, with a few exceptions, must be fully shielded and directed downward. And all of those standards can be illustrated in one simple graphic. And what this does over time is not only reduce the quality of life impacts of glaring artificial light, but over time, as lighting is replaced with dark sky compliant lighting, more of the night sky will be visible. And for a city like Olean in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, where they're on the edge of countryside, it'll be amazing in a few years perhaps to sit in a downtown sidewalk cafe and see more of the stars at night. Reconnection to the universe is a very important thing I think that's been lost when AC current electric light was extended across the country. But there are ways we can mitigate that impact through basic lighting standards. 10, steal from the best examples. Well, we talked a lot about Buffalo and Olean, but there are a lot of great form-based codes throughout the country. My form-based code Bible throughout the code writing process in Buffalo was Form-Based Codes by Dan Paralek, a guide for planners, urban designers, municipalities, and developers. I highly recommend, if you are interested in the impact of zoning in your community, to buy this book and study it. It's a great resource. And I'm also really proud to be part of an organization called the Form-Based Codes Institute. And the Form-Based Codes Institute is a wonderful resource. You can go to formbasedcodes.org. There is, of course, many years of awards given to exemplary form-based codes. The Buffalo Green Code was honored with a Driehaus Award last year. You can download those codes, learn from them, apply lessons to your own community. I think actually for any person interested in how our communities can work better, one of the more fun things, and maybe this is just me because I'm a zoning nerd, is to download other great form-based codes and read them, because you're basically reading instruction manuals for other communities. But I also do that knowing that you have to measure your place before you can really understand how those standards are applied. And only you can know what the physical development pattern is of your community, and also the political realities of what's possible, what isn't possible. So I give this advice out to steal from other places with the additional asterisk that you still have to do the work of applying the standards correctly and make it fit for your community. So why reform your zoning code? Well, number one, to help realize the physical vision your community has set forth. Oftentimes we have community comprehensive plans that lay out a great vision, and often pretty watercolors that show what the community could look like over time. But often that comprehensive plan is not paired with a zoning code that can make that comprehensive plan credible and enforceable. If you want to encourage walkable mixed-use development, I can guarantee you a conventional zoning code focused on use separation, limiting density, and over-accommodating the car will not get you there. Help preserve historic character. You know, I'm the historic preservation planner for the city, but only 4% of the parcels in Buffalo are locally landmarked and reviewed by the Buffalo Preservation Board. That's high, actually, for most communities. Zoning applies to 100% of a community when it's in effect. So think about how form-based codes can reinforce and help restore historic character, even if landmark protections are not in place. It's an incredibly important tool. You can streamline the approvals process for high quality development. You know, one of the great things about building objective measurable standards into a code is that you can rely less on negotiation before a planning board, because by the time a proposal which is consistent with the code arrives to the planning board, it's already mostly right if you design the standards okay. You want to create a predictable investment environment. When you're providing an instruction manual that you know all property owners will have to follow, you're giving an investor certainty, and certainty is confidence in the future. So having that instruction manual in place and building a community consensus around it is really essential in encouraging investment and can be inspiring to future projects. You also want to help make your town competitive in the 21st century. Most municipalities, although the form-based codes now is an accepted practice, do not have a form-based code. And thinking about ways of being competitive, I think, is really important. I think we all want to cooperate with our neighbors and have a boat that rises, but also think about how you're competing with suburban and rural areas for a high quality of life. You want to differentiate yourself, and not in the way that 1950s and 60s planners do, make yourself more like the suburbs. You want to offer a different product set. One of my favorite quotes is from Leon Cryer: "A city is not an accident, but the result of coherent visions and aims." I think the only difference I might have with this quote is that sometimes it's the result of incoherent visions and aims, and sometimes the result of of codes and regulations that are inconsistent with that community vision. You want to match your community vision up with the regulations you have in place so that you can purposefully create a better town over the coming decades. Remember that zoning is a legal implementation mechanism for the community's vision. You can have plans all day long, but you need to match your plans with the regulations you're applying to projects that are coming through the pipeline. And of course, most importantly, a zoning code is an instruction manual for building your community's vision. If your code is broken, it's not producing the development results you want, then you have to create a new instruction manual. Thanks for listening. Can't wait for the Q&A and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was fantastic. So if you have any questions for Chris, please drop them in the chat box. We're collecting them and we will address them at the end. Next up, I'd like to introduce Bernice Radle. Bernice owns and operates Buffalove Development and Little Wheel Restoration a full-service real estate company focused on reviving vacant and/or underutilized places and spaces. The goal is to smash together the basics of urban design, preservation, energy efficiency, and affordability to make neighborhoods better for the people who live, work, and play there. Being a female-owned and minority-focused company, Buffalove and Little Wheel aim to make strides in making spaces for females and minorities in the world of real estate and construction. Bernice's historic renovation work has been featured on HGTV, DIY Network, and in several publications, including the New York Times, Huffington Post, Preservation Magazine, TEDx, and more. Bernice is the vice chair of the City of Buffalo Zoning Board of Appeals. She's a leader in Buffalo's Young Preservationists, a founding member of the Rust Belt Coalition of Young Preservationists, and is the creator of the Heart Bomb, which is a tactical urbanism project that communities across the country and many in Maine have embraced. So thank you so much for joining us, Bernice. I will hand it over to you.
Great. Happy to be here. Chris, can you unshare your screen? I just want to.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, great. Can everybody see that? Good, okay. All right, so first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be back. I mean, I wish I was in Maine, but I am happy to be here. Build Maine was absolutely one of the best events that I've ever attended and spoken at, and I loved every bit of it 4 years ago. So I'm happy to be here again. So I wanted to have a presentation that sort of builds on what Chris just explained. And while Chris is a scholar, I am not that brilliant. I'm just like kind of an average lady. Actually, I always say I'm a dreamer and a doer. And I'm really a person of action. So what this presentation is about is taking the lessons that Chris just said about zoning and sort of explaining how zoning impacted my small scale development journey and how zoning impacts everything that we do. And I wanted to show you sort of a pre-code versus post-green code, and I put an example of Maine in there too. I wanted to show you, you know, sort of how deeply the zoning code can impact your small scale development, and hopefully inspire you to make those zoning code changes and also embrace the small scale developers of the world. So thanks, Mandy, for the introduction. Again, I'm just a little lady with a dream. I'm 33. I do not know everything. Chris always says I'm very pragmatic, but I'm also a big dreamer. And that's sort of how I approach all of the projects that you're about to see. Urbanism is my gospel and walk score is like my guide. So I also, by the way, had to show this. I think having passion about urbanism and cities is super nerdy, and it's what has been my guiding light through all the things you're about to see. So I had to show this picture of me in Jan Gale's office, the author of Cities for People, with a mini little Jane Jacobs in front of a Jane Jacobs letter to him in the middle of Copenhagen. I had to knock on the door and cry when I saw his office, because, you know, when we're all doing this every day, you know, you realize that there's so many great examples out there of people and processes and zoning codes and things that really are making the way, paving the way for us to have better cities. And so anyway, super nerd, love Jane Jacobs and all the things. So this is more of a presentation about Buffalo, although I do love Olean, and I fell in love with Maine and wish we could be there. Buffalo is a city of snow. It's a city of chicken wings. It's a city of Buffalo Bills. And I know I'm in the, you know, New England world here. You know, Buffalo is a city where we've seen 50% of our population decline. We've seen the Rust Belt come and the rust grow. And we've also seen sort of a Rust Belt chic emerge, where we are taking back our cities, but doing in a way that is affordable and is kind of unique compared to most of the other places in the country. I always say Buffalo and the Rust Belt in particular, it's places where opportunity exists. It's where people can thrive, and not just our Rust Belt, you know, small towns, small villages. You know, I guess I should just say not New York, not LA, you know, but Buffalo sits in this place, and a lot of the historic preservationists of the world know Buffalo for one of the thing that we're most known for, which is we have the most incredible architecture. I can get on my bicycle. I can literally bike to anything you see on the screen right now in a matter of maybe 5 or 10 minutes. You know, we stand among giants. We have incredible buildings built by and designed by the most incredible architects of America's history. And it's really like such a fun place to be, right? We have this decline, but we have this like, this just amazingness about our city that still stands. So, but sadly, you know, this is the Buffalo that I know. And I'm not here to crush hearts and make everybody sad, but I am pragmatic, right? So how coincidental that there is a Buffalo, New York sticker right on the middle of this demolition. We have amazing corner taverns. We have buildings that are being torn down left and right. Our city demolished 8,800 buildings, 8,800 buildings in the last 10 years. We have so many vacant structures that are so adorable and so filled with possibility, and they sit there vacant and they decline rapidly. And what happens when they decline? We lose our tax base. We lose the services we desperately need. Our education system is underfunded. Our walkability starts to decline. Our city as a whole starts to retract, and all because one vacancy and then a second vacancy and a third vacancy. It just spirals out of control. And that is the situation that most of the neighborhoods that I work in are in. And we have beautiful buildings in our neighborhoods, but we also have been fighting demolition. And that's why I helped start the Buffalo's Young Preservationists. That's why we created heart bombs. Like, we put hearts on these vacant buildings. These buildings were worth negative money, no value, nothing. Actually, I don't have a slide here, but there's a slide that I do with the Incremental Development Alliance of all the buildings I purchased for less than my student loan, less than my degree, you know, and it's a whole slide of buildings, okay? So Buffalo has the opposite problem at times, and cities have like this, have the opposite problem. So anyway, so I hope you're all not so sad. This is sad, but I'm going to show you things that will hopefully fill your hearts with joy and show that it is possible in higher end markets to do development. It's possible in lower end markets to do development. It's possible in tertiary markets like Buffalo and like our smaller towns that are real stagnant. It is possible to do really good, thoughtful development. You just got to work your ass off, and you've got to be thoughtful. And so I'm going to show you some projects. So, and lastly, on the sad world, this cute little cottage sits directly across from my office right now. I took this picture in the winter. No, it's not snowing in June. although it could be, it hailed last week, actually, like an inch of hail. But this building is still standing right across from my office, across from a cat cafe, okay? And so I wanted to point out that there's just so much to do, and there's so many small scale developers that we need. And the zoning code rewrite has helped to change the game in development. And so anyway, so have to show this. This is the Buffalo that I know of, the Buffalo that's calling the shots. And with all due respect to my male companions and coworkers and friends, great, but like what the heck with some diversity. So this is what I'm trying to do here in our development world, which is building places for people of color and minorities and females to have a voice at the table. And we've been doing that through our small scale development efforts, and I'm going to show you a lot of that. So Buffalove and Little Wheel has been around for 8 years. We were founded in 2012. Over the last 8 years, we've completed nearly 100 projects of various sizes. We do $3,000 apartment renovation. We might do a $100,000 double 2-unit renovation. We're working right now a 9-unit building, a 13-unit building. You know, we're just growing and growing smart. I always say we're small but mighty. I don't want to be 25 people, but we're growing, and we're pushing this argument of renovating our historic buildings with integrity and for our neighborhood. So we're 15 people full time. We're female owned and female operated, which is really fun. And we try really hard to have a diverse mix of people, humans, on our staff. And of course, living wage is the minimum wage. In fact, like, don't even get me started on that. My values are out there. I'm very forward with them. But our focus is preservation. Our focus has shifted, thanks to the Green Code, I'm going to show this, into making spaces for small businesses and making our apartments and our projects as energy efficient and affordable as possible. We are never perfect, but we sure try. And everything is incremental, which is why I'm part of the Incremental Development Alliance. Walk Score is our guide, urbanism is our gospel, and also we build portfolios for other people, which is how we stay full-time employed, because small scale projects are really a side hustle unless you have scale. But in order to have scale, you have expenses. So we work on projects that are ours, and then we work on projects that are other people whose goals and values align with ours. So some projects you see, I do not own. I am not like some crazy wealthy person. I have a like $20 watch and a bandana, like from the store, like thrift store, like this is me, okay? So I don't want you to think like, oh, wow, she's been doing so many big projects on her own. Absolutely not the case. These are projects for lots of people and who align with our values. So Buffalove started before the Green Code. And I call the Green Code the Elvis Code, because it was literally written, Chris gave me this idea, it was written when Elvis was on the TV, like when Elvis was alive. And for so many years, we had this extremely suburban, extremely like sprawl focused code in a city was built pre-car, you know, all these beautiful walkable dense neighborhoods. And so we started out renovating buildings. All these buildings that you see here were actually up at the city auction, ready for demolition. We buy them, we would renovate them, we would rent them, hold them, love them, paint them pink, because I love pink houses and making things super cute. And we would love them. And we still do projects like this. We still do lots and lots of apartment renovations and house renovations and things, because they're valuable in our community. People have to have a nice quality, affordable place to live. And we try really hard to keep everything under $1,000. And that's a huge important aspect, because we don't do anything with grants. We don't get any money from anybody. Everything we do is cash or with a bank, no grants. So then we were doing lots of renovations all over my neighborhood, which is the west side of Buffalo. We were just buying and renovating, buying, renovating, buying and renovating. But what ended up happening, so we have vacant structures, vacant lots. We're taking over vacant lots, putting in community gardens, putting in sculptures, working with the community to try to like bring energy to our neighborhood. But there was a lot of storefronts that were missing, and that's what I'm going to go into. So, you know, these vacant lots are sitting here, oh my gosh, with trash in them, you know, and then we've turned them into spaces where people can learn about fruits and vegetables. And I'll tell you what, kids in the neighborhood love strawberries. So if you can grow strawberries on your vacant lots in your communities, heck yeah, you will always be the hero to all the kids when you can plant strawberries in your community garden and make kind of funny sculptures and put sunflowers in the dirt, which take very little and bring so much joy to people. And then we evolved a little bit. I had the HGTV show, which brought a lot of love and life to the neighborhood where I live on the west side of Buffalo. And we renovated this house that we bought at the city auction. It was vacant forever. We renovated this house, bought it for $16,000, renovated it. We actually sold it. This is still the only thing I've ever sold in my 8 years of doing this. But it was just so beautiful, and we got an offer, and I needed to pay the taxes from the HGTV show. So I didn't even have a choice. I probably would have held it. But so anyway, sold that to a homeowner. Cool. That gets us into the spotlight. And it still actually has been airing on the DIY network, I might add, which is weird, but it's cool. So then hello comes the green code, right? The green code like basically took what you just saw was all illegal. There was no parking. There was the lot widths were too small and not wide enough. We weren't we were not a suburban city, so everything was non-conforming. So I had to renovate what was there, and that was okay. But we still needed to make a lot of inroads, and that's why we pushed really hard to build and create and support the Buffalo Green Code. So the Green Code comes into play, and now all of the small scale, cool little cutie pie buildings become legal again. They become conforming thanks to the work of Chris and everybody else who measured the building and measured the neighborhood and thought about the character and said, hey, if this building doesn't have parking, let's say, okay, it doesn't need parking, right? It existed forever without parking. What are they gonna do? Buy the house next door to tear the house down to then provide parking for this little storefront? No. So I wanna show you a series of examples. So this is the Huntress. Yes, this little baby building I named the Huntress, okay? She is a ferocious warrior. And I'm gonna show you why she's ferocious. So pre-Green Code, people would have said, no parking for 2 businesses and a house. Blah, no, right? No parking, blah, can't handle, does not compute, right? They would say, how could you have a building that occupies, almost 100% of the lot? There's no green space. There's nowhere to put the snow. Everyone in Buffalo says, where do you put the snow in the winter? I'm telling you what, there's been years I haven't even picked up a shovel. There's also years where we have 7 feet of snow. So when there's 7 feet of snow, no one has anywhere to put the snow. You know, it's not like just I'm the only one. So it's just people calm down with the snow. And also this is a mixed use building in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So wow, that's illegal. We can't have businesses in our residential neighborhood. Green Code comes into play. This becomes legal. I buy this building because I'm like, we're gonna take advantage of the Green Code. We're gonna own this. We're gonna be the champions of small business. And we started. So I wanted to show just on such a small building, how many people it takes to love and cherish and be thoughtful to make a small teeny little building happen. And so we had to have an art opening. We had to have a big party. We had to get small businesses interested in taking a huge leap on a vacant building that had been vacant forever. And it took a lot. It took my staff and our team a lot of energy to uncover and figure it out. And we did. We worked through it over a year. So we partnered with small businesses. This is Netta. She is a nail salon tech. She is so ferocious. She is amazing. She was thriving pre-COVID and will thrive again once she's allowed to go back into her space. you know, she was intrigued by the idea of being a small business in a small space. This is 600 square feet, and paying a reasonable rate. She pays $650 a month for a fully renovated, outfitted building and or space. And so Netta signs up, and then Stefan and Dave sign up, and they're opening a popcorn shop. A popcorn shop in a Rust Belt community, thriving in the middle of COVID, thriving. He can't pop enough popcorn right now, sending out 800 bags of popcorn out to the world in once a week and doing dozens of deliveries. This is what small business is about. This is what our Main Street buildings are about. This is what the zoning code allowed to happen, is for these buildings and these storefronts to come alive again without parking, without like weird ass rules that encourage suburban development. You know, the money stays locally, the wealth stays locally. You know, they care about the neighborhood. They put the plants out and the flowers. You know, it's just so important and impactful to our neighborhoods. And now this is what the building looks like today. So the parking is on street. Are there problems? Yes, there's one guy that complains about the parking all the time. He's the next door neighbor. I actually texted Stefan last week and I go, will you just drop off some popcorn to this guy so we can stop complaining, right? But no one else complains, not the other neighbors, not the people down the street, certainly not the people walking to get their nails done. You know, we have to stop and take into account the fact that there are 2 small businesses operating out of this tiny little building. There's another business that I didn't even mention, which is in the house. She's a photographer. She has her photography studio in the house. And she, Heather, has her young son there. In one little baby building, because of the Green Code's adoption, we were able to revive this building, bring back tax dollars into our neighborhood, bring back services, bring back life, right? Bring back energy, all because of the change in the Green Code. And so I'm an action person, and I can't help but say, like, you know, yeah, I'm on the zoning board. Yes, the mayor appointed me to the zoning board. Thank you, mayor. Like, awesome. But if this is like a game changer to our communities. And for so long in so many cities that we go into with the Incremental Development Alliance, everyone has screwed up zoning codes. Even affluent, amazing, higher end markets have crappy zoning codes that do not allow this to be renovated or built. So then I wanted to shift to my headquarters, Buffalove headquarters, which I did name the Jolly Green Giant for obvious reasons. This building, it was completely illegal because there are 11 units and 0 parking spots. 0 parking spots for 11 units. I would have had, pre-Green Code, I would have had to buy half of the block and tear it down and put in a parking lot. If we didn't have the Green Code, remove the minimum parking requirements. Take that in for a second. There's probably 7 buildings in the neighborhood I would have had to buy. First of all, that would have been like $1 million for parking for cars. No, thank you. No, thank you. But the Green Code comes into play and boom, bam. Now it's all allowed. And I'm like, woo, sweet. We're going to buy this. We're going to renovate it. We're going to put our storefront in it, and it's going to be great. This is actually what the storefront looked like. Our storefront looked like before. Why? Because the owners didn't have any money to invest in the buildings because so few people wanted to take a chance on things that were illegal. They didn't understand the old code sucked. They didn't understand if they were going to need variances or not. People didn't want to invest in the neighborhoods, so on and so forth. This is what I walked into. I am not kidding you. That 2x4 was holding up the entire ceiling. Okay? This is what our office looks like now. And still being renovated because everything I do is incremental. We have like $0 to do this stuff. But every year we do small improvements. We did a badass new tin ceiling because the historic preservationist in me cannot not do a tin ceiling. You know, it's brand new, but it's going to be great for 100 years, you know? So anyway, but this would not have been possible without the Green Code. We employ 15 people in 750 square feet with not 1 parking spot. Put that in perspective. And there we are, little cute little storefront. And yeah, you guys can give me crap about having a mansard roof. My incremental development roots tell me that I'm going to wait and I'm going to keep rents affordable. So I'm going to wait on the mansard roof until the time is right. So I'm okay with it. And then this is how the building looks like today. It's no longer a Jolly Green Giant. We worked with the Albright Knox to bring in the most beautiful mural dedicated to the Latino community. And we worked so hard to renovate the building and get people in there. There are currently 17 residents, 2 businesses that employ 20 people with not one parking spot. There are 3 bus lines right outside my door. City Hall is within 1 mile. Downtown is within 1 mile. There's grocery stores. There's a Family Dollar. There's a college. There's Typical Coffee. There's a brewery. Almost anything you need in your daily life can be done on foot. And it shows because several of our residents do not have cars. And so anyway, so I just wanted to say, like, without the green code, this wouldn't be possible. My taxes went up this year because we did all this work. I'm not complaining, but the city of Buffalo now gets $10,000 a year in taxes from me because of the work that we did. And I'm happy to give it. It's a drop in the bucket for the services that we have because we live so close, right? So that's what we need. We need more and more and more of that. And I guarantee you, on $1 per square foot per acre basis, I'm paying more taxes than Walmart is, right? So it's, yeah. Next one. This is the last example from Buffalo. I have a main example. This is Sprout. Isn't Sprout cute? What you can see under there in this building, if you look closely, is that there's actually little storefront details. I see little columns there and a transom and a door. And I said, that looks like a storefront to me. When I saw it go on the market, I was like, oh, let me take a quick look. Well, turns out, you know it, the Elvis Code in the 50s made this storefront illegal. It shuttered its doors, and for 60 plus years, it was vacant. It became a storage unit. A building went from 3 units of money income down to 2 units, which is a financial detriment. I mean, we're not even talking about property rights, but that is like really not cool, right? Completely aborted, completely abandoned storefront with 2 apartments that were not abandoned. They were just vacant at the time when I bought it. So again, a mixed use property in the middle of a residential neighborhood, completely illegal under the old zoning code. And people would say, no, we don't want it, blah, you know, but it's a new day. People are like super excited about this actually. And there is a little bit of parking, but not enough. And I would have had to buy the house next door to tear it down to build enough parking for a commercial use and 2 apartments. That is not financially feasible. Our zoning code made it not financially feasible for us to renovate these buildings. So I have a video, and you can see us here unveiling the storefront, which hadn't been shown since 1957. And we worked hard to renovate the building. I got somebody that was interested, one of my residents said she wanted to open a pie shop. And I said, oh boy, do I have the perfect space for you. That would be a perfect little pie shop. And she signed on, and we worked with her to get her some funding and some financing and get her a space. We believed in her. I just said, bring me a pie, and I will believe in you. And here is us unveiling the storefront for the first time. And actually, Chris is in there because he's just so taken back by the fact that the green code enabled this transformation to happen. And so it's such a big deal. And so this is what it looks like on the inside now. That original glass was just repaired. The door, that was a door, not the original door, but we put a Dutch door on it because, hello, pies and Dutch doors, they go hand in hand. And we're working right now with a couple of permits to finalize this project. And Sadie, who makes amazing pies, will be making pies and having coffee in right down the street from where I live and right down the street from all of our projects, actually. This is within a mile of my home and our office. And this space would never have been possible without the legalizing of the neighborhood shops, which is the 6.1.1.f in our zoning code. And this is what it looked like. We had a little party, of course, and it's beautiful. So now the neighbors can eat pie and drink coffee. And I'll tell you what, one other lesson in small business, if you're thinking about buying a building and helping a small business thrive, if you are going to a loan committee to ask for a loan for your business, bring your product. Sadie walked into a loan committee and asked for $20,000, I think $15,000 or $20,000. She walks in with a pie. She hands the pie pieces over to every person in the loan committee and walks out with like $18,000 for her business because they're all just eating pie. And they're like, this is so good. Of course we're gonna support you, right? So don't be afraid to help your small businesses. Don't be afraid to use their products to your favor, to helping your building come back to life at the same time. And the same thing goes for popcorn. Hello, bring popcorn to anything. It's like, popcorn is love, right? So people love popcorn, and you can help people find the money that they need, their small business money that they need. So I wanted to show an example in Lewiston, Maine, and I actually don't know the full zoning code, but I have been to Lewiston, and I fell in love with the little hot dog or burger, or whatever it was, sidewalk, streetscape art, and the buildings that were there, and was really such an incredible experience to be there. And so what I did is, Chris went and like dug into the history of Maine, which is amazing, amazing, right? But I wanted to look on LoopNet to see if there was a project in the neighborhood for sale and try to explain how possible it is for someone in Lewiston, Maine to buy a property and sort of put their money where their mouth is and do this. So I saw this building on LoopNet. I don't know anything about the building, but maybe some of you do. This building is for sale for $200,000. And I just did a quick back of the napkin math here. 2 apartments at $800 a month, 1 office, it's even $600 a month, would pay for your mortgage, it would pay for your expenses, and you'd probably actually make a couple $100 a month on this building if you were to buy it. And it's actually a really cool building. It spans 2 streets. So it's got a space in the front and space in the back. That office space could be reactivated. Offices people work in offices, they buy coffee, they hang out, and they support the local economy, and furthermore, depending on what the zoning code looks like there, and I did not do a ton of research on it, I'm sorry, but you may be able to reactivate that storefront and add storefront windows and bring it back to life. I know this is on Mill Street. I know it's in downtown. I probably walked right past it 4 years ago, but I saw it on LoopNet, and it's such a practical, not so expensive number. And you might be able to work with a local bank. I know Bangor, Maine, sponsored this. Can they do a renovation loan for you? Can they help you do maybe an extended term? Can you do a residential mortgage since there's 2 apartments with 1 office and it becomes your apartment, and you rent the other apartment out, similar to what Chris is doing actually with his little brewery. You can live in 1 apartment, rent out the other apartment, rent out the office space, take out a residential mortgage, and bring your neighborhood back to life in 1 small incremental step. Go get some pots, some planters from your local hardware store, put beautiful flowers in them, paint the doors a pink or green or blue, whatever color you like, put some cute curtains in the window, and you'll be surprised how much value and how much energy you bring just by falling in love and by investing a little bit of your energy and your attention and thoughtfulness into your neighborhood. So I wanted to show that as an example, what a cool building it is to have 2 sides. I mean, that is awesome. And sort of end with the idea that, I'm an action person. I am not a scholar, right? But there's a lot of people out there that aren't scholars. They are neighborhood activists. They are small business owners. They are teachers. They are service folks. They have to build wealth too. And if you have the power to change your zoning code or to encourage changes in your zoning code, it may seem to be so boring, but in the conversation about racial equality and economic inequalities, the inequalities of our world, helping to create a bridge and create a more consistent and open, transparent zoning code can actually encourage us to build wealth, not just for people that understand development, but for everybody. It opens the door for equality. It opens the door for building wealth for people, for families, for our neighborhoods, and for our community. And we have the power to make those changes. We have the power to teach people how to do this stuff. We have the power to say yes to the small business owner when they got no's all over the place from big developers because they're a person of color, or they don't have the vision, or they don't have the business plan. Well, we have the power to do that, to make those changes and to put our money and our actions and our beliefs where we on the forefront. So I really encourage you to think that yes, zoning is kind of boring, but it really fucking matters. Thank you. Sorry for the F-bombs, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Bernice. That was incredibly inspiring, and so happy that you're part of IncDev. And just another plug, we're bringing IncDev to do a workshop in Maine virtually in September. So we'll have all these details and presentation materials in our follow-up email, which you should receive in a couple days. So please check out our website for more details. So next week, before we start the Q&A portion, I'd like to just put in a plug for our event with Cade Benfield. Cade's actually on the line right now. He is a principal at Placemakers in Washington, D.C., and will be discussing the blind spot in climate change conversation, the environmental implication of land use patterns. He'll offer land development strategies and the research behind them that support both human and environmental health. So if you have not yet bought a ticket for next week, I'll drop it in the chat box right now. Yeah, so I guess we'll just jump into the Q&A portion. Kara, do you want to take us away?
Sure. It's hard to follow up Bernice's presentation with a question about sprinklers, but here we go. We had two questions about sprinklers. One was directed at Chris. How do sprinklers in mixed-use structures get accommodated? And then we had another sprinkler question for Bernice from Kevin. What do you do about sprinkler requirements? So
I'll take it on the, Chris, give me a second. Let me just take this. So if you have an existing building, typically what I've seen in a lot of communities that I've worked in is that the building inspectors are not evil. Okay, let's just start there. Everybody thinks they're evil. Yes, there are some evil building inspectors, but they really want to work with you. So what I have done is we sort of, first of all, if they're existing building, your existing building code should work around the idea of sprinklers. You have to do a lot more measures. So you have to have, hardwired smoke detectors, 2 inches of firewall, up 2 inches minimum of drywall, or an hour and a half of fire separation on your sides, your walls, your ceilings, etc. So I just encourage you to, when they say you need sprinklers, you need to say, okay, I can't afford that. What is the alternative? Is there an alternative? Help me, work with me, please work with me. This is very important. And so I have found that even I have a gut renovation building right now in Niagara Falls, and the inspector said to me, as long as you're not changing the walls and the density, we're good. Like there's 2 entrances each way, we're okay. Most buildings were built even 100 years ago with 2 entrances. And if there's not, they might want to require that. But just ask, don't walk away, ask. What are the alternatives? Because I guarantee you that yes, you might have some evil inspectors, and I'm so sorry, but they are human. Just remember they're human. And I also should say, this is not something I recommend, but I will say it. And show up with that pie to your building inspectors. I think they have to say no, but they probably won't say no. They'll take the pie and they'll eat it. They'll go, maybe we can help you figure out how to, get don't give them money, but if you can show up with some popcorn and pie, you might at least get a friendlier face on the other end. It's not bribing, I promise.
Hey, Bernice, do you want to just mention a little bit more about the difference between the International Existing Building Code and the International Building Code?
Well, every state has different code adoptions. Most people are pretty much up to date, but the existing building code basically gives you a little more leeway, and then you can actually make an appeal. So like we've made appeals for foam roofs and gotten approvals from that. Also, if you're doing a historic preservation project, your historic preservation details often can take precedent over the codes, depending. That's all a conversation you have with your building inspectors and your code town officials. Sometimes sometimes people interpret codes differently, and if you're finding that you have a building inspector that's maybe not interpreting it properly, you could also ask for an interpretation, or you could we see a lot of people kind of challenge the building inspector as well. I could do it this way, and sometimes they just don't know. I asked the building inspector if I could do a foam roof one day, and he said, well, let me look at the material. Let me look at the cut sheets. It was like an open conversation. It wasn't a hard no. So I would say, existing building is different. New construction, gut rehab is, if you're starting out on your first project, buy something that's like not gut. Okay, there, I said it. Buy something that's operating. You'll be in a definite world of, it's easier because you're in your existing building code world. But we could have whole other conversations, or I could talk for hours about code. But that's basically what you need to know. Just don't be afraid to ask questions and come up with alternative measures, and ask your architect. If they say, no, it's not possible, then say, well, how did this restaurant do it? How did this space do it? Right? Like I had an architect once build a fire tube to get around a second means of egress because the buildings were smashed together so tightly they couldn't put it in. So they worked with the inspector to build a tube, like a 2-hour tube, that if there was a fire, people could go there and be saved. It's pretty amazing what creativity can do. So.
Well, and I would just mention that Maine has the International Existing Building Code. It's adopted, and some inspectors don't, well, I guess I should say, aren't as familiar with it. So sometimes you have to be a little bit more, involved and active in that conversation, just to make sure that they are using all of the tools at our disposal.
And a lot of times those communities also have to adopt that as their policy, or as their own ordinance. So the state may have it available, but the local community still has to adopt it as well.
And you have to hope that the people at City Hall have the training on the code, which is often the struggle that they're facing. Chris, you might have, Chris works with inspectors constantly. I'm sure you have lots of insight here.
Yeah, I think I'm here.
Yep.
Yep, I had to reconnect with my phone. Got kicked off on my laptop. I just know that, every state has different amendments to the International Building Code. I'm not familiar with Maine's, but I had some experience in the sprinkler question on the building I'm considering purchasing. And certainly if I were forced to create sprinklers, or even forced to have fire-rated walls, take down the amazing tin ceiling and drywall over all the plaster, it would have killed my project. So that's certainly a regulatory barrier, but luckily in my case, I got clarity from inspectors because there was no third floor use, and because there's no expansion or change of use in the commercial space, then those requirements did not apply. I can tap into the historic building code. So we lucked out there, but there may be some differences in Maine building code that I would be less familiar with.
But it doesn't negate the fact that you should talk to your inspector. You should, call your architects. There's plenty of architects out there. Hire, you can ask architects for advice. They can be a champion for you. And don't be afraid to ask questions from your builders, your architects, and your code officials.
Great. Barbara mentioned that Maine does not allow for any changes to the building code, no local adoption unless there's under 4,000 population. And she says, as an inspector, I would say ask for citations of the code. We should always be able to tell you why. So thanks, Barbara, for that. Question from Jackie, which actually, Chris, you answered it in the chat box, but it would be great to just talk a little bit more about this. Are there tree requirements in the green code?
Yes, there is a street tree requirement for new construction. So if a new building is erected, then you're required to install street trees every 30 feet. If it's not possible, they can be planted in other sections of the neighborhood. And there's also a tree conservation provision in the code. So if any mature tree, I think it's over 4 inches diameter at breast height, must be removed for development purposes. It has to be replaced in kind with new plantings, either on the site or in the street or within the neighborhood.
Yep.
Those are very basic practical requirements.
And as a zoning board official, I'm like the tree czar. I'm like, do not mess with our trees. Look at the critical root zone. What are we doing here? So if you have a good zoning board that can implement, or I should, fight for the trees, because what a lot of people will do is say, oh, we're gonna do this new building and we're gonna remove all these trees on the site, and then they don't want to replace them because it's expensive and they don't see value directly. So I'm always like, well, we have this park over here. Actually, one of the city things about the green code is you don't have to replace it on site. You can plant those trees anywhere in the city. So if you need 40 trees, hello park, you can put them in the park, which is really exciting and fun. So just if you're finding that your zoning code, if you have a tree ordinance, get your zoning board to really champion it, because you can make big strides on that.
By the way, it's very important. I mean, Bernice is a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, thank goodness. It's important when rewriting a code that you bring your planning board and zoning board officials along with you, that they're an intimate part of the process, so that they not only understand what the standards are, but also why they are there. And I think I noticed, and Bernice has been a firewall of defense for the Green Code since it was adopted. But it's what we discovered is that certain developers early in the process after the 2017 adoption tested the city's commitment to certain standards that were new. And it really required the Zoning Board of Appeals to understand and defend the requirements early on, so that it would send a signal to other investors that certain expectations the community were established and that they would be defended, and it was unlikely that they would receive routine zoning variances from them. So it's important to bring the ZBA along with you in any kind of visioning and code writing process.
And make sure there's plenty of training, and make sure your meetings are multiple. We have our meetings are once a month, and I'm always asking for them to be twice a month, because you want to get people in the door and out the door. You want to get them to code approval so they can make changes in their neighborhoods and communities. On the tree thing,
a good code gets you either a yes or a no very quickly.
Yeah. One thing from Cade said, I'll be talking about trees and community nature next week. Great. I'm excited. So
we have a really great question from Betsy. She says, what are the first 3 steps to getting to the goal of rewriting the zoning to a form-based code?
Let's see, Chris, you had to take the mayor out to dinner. I'm just kidding. Well, I think you had to host a small dinner, right?
My friend Chuck Bernice, who I wrote the Olean Code with, and who I call the father of the Green Code in Buffalo. He's on the line here, is actually in the chat box. And he's actually the person many years ago who convinced me that zoning was interesting. Because conventional zoning isn't interesting, and form-based codes, he made me quickly discover, can be quite fascinating because they help you visualize the future of your city or town. But Chuck and I started as citizens. I was not on the city staff at the time. I was working in a coffee house. Back in 2005 and 2006, we brought some Common Council members down to Biloxi, Mississippi for the Smart Code Conference. And we brought the Smart Code Conference back to Buffalo, and we wined and dined business
officials and public policymakers and elected officials at the Saturn Club, which is a private club in Buffalo, and eventually convinced, with the help of our local AIA chapter, the newly minted mayor at the time, Byron Brown, that reforming the zoning code fit within his goal of making the city much more business friendly and transparent. And it took a little while for the project to start. It was 2010, but thanks to the mayor's 100% commitment over a very long code writing process, it took 244 public meetings, only because we're a city of 250,000 people, and it takes an awful lot of time to develop consensus around an entirely new code. But we got it done in 7 years, finally adopted in 2017. But if you can combine citizen kind of grassroots support and initiative with support as we got from our AIA and other local partners, and convince an elected official, especially a mayor, that this project is worth it, and that and worth it so much that it's worth taking the hits over time, because imagine rewriting an entire code and changing the regulations that apply to people's homes and businesses and projects can be quite controversial. And it takes a lot of political capital to get to a point where you can be consistently committed to rewriting a mammoth ordinance. But and that's true even with very smaller code reforms. Like if all you were to do in your code was to eliminate minimum parking requirements or update your sign standards or create design standards for a neighborhood Main Street or village Main Street, it takes political commitment and grassroots support. And I think that the Green Code is a good example of how it rose from a grassroots initiative, and then eventually I was hired by the city to help write it, and then finally get it adopted 7 years later. But it takes long-term commitment to the idea to make it happen.
And I should say, like, don't be afraid. We had to make buttons. We had to make signs and buttons and get our friends to come to the meetings and get small business owners to come to the meetings. It was a real hard time, actually. And in fact, Joe Minicozy from Urban 3 came in to talk about density and talk about proximity. And I mean, it was just like over and over and over again. And it was okay, but it took a lot. It took a lot. And I still have the buttons, because like for memorabilia of how hard it was to get it adopted. But it could be a lot easier in other towns.
Yeah, I didn't touch on the consensus building process much because there's only 45 minutes for a presentation. But consensus building is the most important part of code writing. And both for getting it adopted and then having it defended once it is adopted. And that is what took the most time. It wasn't the writing of the code itself. You need popular support, and you kind of have to approach it, whether you're a public official or a citizen, as an activist, that you're creating social change by uprooting standards that don't work and replacing it with a new system. All that's very hard. And so I don't want to get everyone into thinking that this was an easy process. It wasn't. But at the end of the day, we had a code that was adopted by 100% of the Common Council, unanimously adopted, and not a single lawsuit was filed challenging the adoption of the ordinance, which I think is unheard of for any large city in the country.
Yeah, and even the big developers were on board because they just wanted to be able to walk in and have some consistency. People want consistency in life. They want to be able to plan. And when you have to walk in and you have all these 1,000 questions, it makes it hard for small developers. It makes it hard for homeowners. It makes it hard for everybody.
Adopting the new code hasn't removed development controversy, but it has significantly minimized because the expectations by the community are now built into the code. And when a developer follows it, it's a pretty easy process. And it's not like it was before the code was adopted, where sometimes controversial projects, in the absence of any real clear guidance from the city about what was expected, would extend for months of city planning board meetings without any resolution. And for developers and investors and small business people and homeowners too, time is money and they just don't want to deal with the hassle. So if you can create consensus around a set of expectations for the future of your town and build that directly into objective standards in your code and matching it with a clear approval process that gives you a light at the end of the tunnel, it's just going to make it a lot more friendly for everybody.
Oh, and one other last thing is, depending on who your mayor is, just what I think one of the things that Mayor Brown in Buffalo, sort of why he took the lead is this is his legacy. right? So how many mayors have an opportunity to have a legacy project? One that lasts a long time, not one that's like short or small. So pitching it as a legacy project, I think helped. I mean, I wasn't there for it, but my understanding in talking to him, it helped him understand that like this is like a long-term commitment. And he liked that. You know, everyone wants to make an impact on our neighborhoods.
And I was just going to ask a question that follows up on that. Most of our communities don't have a mayor or strong mayor form of government. And so I'm curious, in Olean, who really led that process and championed it along the way.
Well, I think in Olean, there was a set of very committed progressive downtown business owners, led by Jeff Belt, who is also, he's from Buffalo, but he bought a factory and brought it back to life in Olean, Sol Epoxy. It has about 100 employees, but a great legacy business in Olean. So he had a tremendous amount of credibility. And he convinced the new mayor, who is a Tea Party Republican, that adopting a new form-based code was the most business-friendly thing that he could do. And what's remarkable about Olean is that, unlike Buffalo, where much of the process actually was in convincing all of the hippies that it was a good idea, in our hipster neighborhoods. In Olean, we had a 6-month adoption process. It was also unanimously adopted by the city council and championed by a Republican Tea Party mayor. And
if I can jump in a little bit with that, Chris.
Sure, Chuck. Here's Chuck.
It wasn't without political controversy. The mayor that we originally started working under, Linda Witt, lost the election in good measure because of the zoning reform. And the new guy ran on defeating the zoning reform. And as soon as he got into office, he was convinced that the reform needed to happen, and he took it the rest of the way. And Linda is back on common council there. So it was a strange situation, but it all worked out in the end. And at the grassroots level, there really wasn't much controversy and amongst local business members at all. There was a little bit of controversy, obviously, in the mayor's office, but not in the council and nowhere else.
Thank you. It's a fascinating series of events.
I think, by the way, I don't know, it's a comment here about, I could imagine a situation where citizens demand parking or suburban development, and that is often true. And I think one of the reasons I say that zoning reform should be approached almost like an activist is that you're also in the consensus building process trying to convince your fellow citizens of the merits of a different approach. And it would be, it wasn't easy getting minimum parking requirements abolished in a city of 250,000 people. And messaging was incredibly important. And consensus building requires a great deal of skill and diplomacy in convincing your fellow stakeholders and community builders of a certain course of action. I could probably do an entire presentation on how we did that. But in Buffalo, there were many people who were opposed to many of the reforms that were being adopted, and many of them eventually became advocates. But that the messaging and consensus building is what gets you to the end goal.
Another good point too with the code reform is this all depends on your local conditions, your local laws, your local political situation, the size or scope of the reform project you want to undertake. So you've got to take good measure of what's best for your own community. In Buffalo, we started to discover that asking for big reform and some fundamental changes to the code was actually much more effective in the end than trying to reform the old code, trying to whittle around the edges of the old code. We wouldn't have gotten any of these reforms in and the entire code if we had decided to reform the old code. Chris at one point made the decision that reforming the whole thing is probably the best ask.
Yeah, it's hard for people to take incremental changes sometimes, and then you don't get the political will and movement around what you need around the whole thing, unless it's like direct action and deep change.
And by the way, to building on that, Bernice, there's a lot of advocates in the form-based community that caution against wholesale change, and that is not my experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is as difficult to make incremental changes sometimes as it is to do a giant change. And what the Buffalo approach was more of a revolution than an evolution. And we were benefited in a way from the old code being so bad that there were no people committed to it. There were no defenders of the old system. But I would push back against other form-based code practitioners who suggest that communities should not consider wholesale rewrites of their codes, especially if they are working so poorly.
Yeah, and there have been cities that have been successful. I know Atlanta has made a series of changes that have been small and incremental, but Atlanta is just such a big city, and it's probably just was easier to like add one thing. But that also comes with 3 years of trial and error and adding and small fights and so it has its ups and its downs. But I agree. I think complete reform was very hard. 6 years and 244 meetings was very hard. We were meeting to death. But at the end of the day, it's just been really monumental in so many ways. And I'm not the only one doing this kind of small development work. I might just be a louder voice, but it's opened the floodgates. It's allowed Chris to look at a neighborhood bar as a developer and be able to entertain that. It's actually allowed banks to come into our neighborhoods to provide funding and financing. They finally say, okay, it's going to be easier, and they can understand what they're getting into, and they feel that predictability. So,
and what I've discovered in my own projects, and it made me really happy to be able to do this, is that my bank is requiring a zoning compliance letter indicating that the use I'm proposing is consistent with the rules and procedures of the zoning ordinance. And 3 years ago, I could not have provided that, and I would not get my loan.
Right.
Because the use variance process is just so uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I wanted to backtrack a bit, because I think in arguing for the larger reform, the Green Code includes a lot of provisions that simply would not have been possible if they were proposed as individual incremental reforms. And I'm thinking things like the dark sky standards. That by itself could never have been adopted by our Common Council. It just wouldn't capture their imagination in any real way. Minimum parking requirements. I don't know for sure that would have been adopted by itself. And there are so many other opportunities for progressive reform that got wrapped up in the larger initiative and were carried along with it. But if they were by themselves, I don't have much confidence that we could have done them. And so that is one other benefit of simply looking at your broken code and saying, let's just throw it out and start over. And we can do everything great that we've always wanted to do all at the same time. A larger project sometimes has greater momentum. That's not the experience of every city. You have to have a keen understanding of your political realities. I mean, large zoning code rewrites have failed in other cities. Austin, Texas is a great example. But there are other cities like Buffalo and recently Hartford that it just got another Treehouse Award from the Form-Based Codes Institute that were able to undertake larger reforms and be quite successful in taking the whole-scale rewrite approach. And that could be done on a citywide level, or as in the case of Olean, where we simply rewrote the downtown code as almost a separate ordinance, separate from the larger zoning ordinance in effect in the rest of the city.
And also, just one other thought, sorry, persistence and patience and perseverance is key. So there were moments in the Green Code, many moments in the code where we thought it was going to die. And we had to push hard and get our friends there and talk to people that didn't understand and speak up at meetings and try our best to come to the table. And there were things that we lost in the Green Code. We cannot rebuild neighborhood shops brand new still. That's a change that needs to make. That got scrapped off the table, but we can do existing shops. We can't do new shops in our residential neighborhoods. So I just be persistent. Don't back down and try to come to the table. This bigger conversation about equity and equality right now is really a fascinating time, because everybody is begging for bridges to equality, everyone. And while this isn't related to, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movement directly, it is. Some people might not understand it because zoning is zoning, but it is. And we can say as advocates and people in this field that we can help you. We can help bridge these gaps and find the energy behind it that we need behind it to make change.
Thanks, you guys. We have one more question.
Yes,
here.
the code discourages change. Sorry, for Ken, the code discourages change and supports local small businesses. Yes and no. We actually banned drive-throughs in most of our neighborhoods, which was amazing. And so, yeah, I guess it does discourage like Taco Bells.
Well, Taco Bell be welcome to do an urban building.
Exactly. They'd be welcome to do an urban building, and let's bring it on, you know.
We had a good question from Ron Gann. He asked, what do you do when your city doesn't want to involve the citizenry in the process? How is it possible to write a new code without involving people who have substantial experience with our code? Or just people in general who live in a place?
Well, I'd say if the city is unwilling to engage citizens, then any reform effort's doomed to fail. But in my experience, I mean, I started the zoning code rewrite process with Chuck and others as activists outside of city government. And we didn't wait on getting permission from city officials to start it. We started the project as though it would inevitably become adopted one way or another. We recognized a systemic problem in a suburban drive-only zoning code that was the root of so many of the development controversies in the city. And we organized the community to advocate for change. And maybe we were lucky in a way of having a mayor that really embraced the idea, but we didn't wait for the mayor to propose it. And we didn't wait for any common council people to oppose it. And I don't think that even on the common council, we would have had any real champions of a zoning code rewrite if citizens hadn't been pushing for it for so long. So I would say that, well, if you have uncooperative city officials, get new city officials, but don't wait on them either. Start the code rewrite reform effort as a citizen-led effort and get the elected officials you need to be responsive to it.
I think one of the things we did early on, and this sounds ridiculously simple and common sense, but with when we brought the Smart Code Conference to town, we identified around my kitchen table about 200 of the most important stakeholders, politically, people who are politically influential, because this is a political process that you're engaging in with zoning reform. And we invited them. I think we got something like 126 people, 128 people that came to the conference. And these weren't just average people off the street as much as we wanted to involve average people. We wanted to get to the most important stakeholders first and get them comfortable with these ideas. So I think that was really important that we did that. Everything we did after that, I think, was much more comfortable to all the power structure.
Then we had a planning commissioner in 2006 that was totally dismissive of the idea, and we weren't discouraged by that because, well, he didn't last. And a new zoning commissioner came, or new planning commissioner came in that eventually hired me to rewrite it. So I would say don't necessarily be discouraged by any political impediments in the start of any community-driven process, but find ways over time to get around them.
Yeah, I think Ron's question might be related to a situation in Portland where the city has initiated a rewrite in 2 phases. The first phase, reorganizing the code, and the second phase, changing the substance of the code. And it's, you know.
Well, citizens should create a Facebook group, Citizens for the New Code Rewrite. This is what we do all the time. It could be a quasi small army. Show up to all the meetings, bring signs, make buttons. That's what we did. We were like, I had buttons that say heart, 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 the green code. And I gave them all the council members to wear. And I was like trying to convince them to wear them, support it, right? And so if they're not listening to the community, you're not inviting the community, show up. you know, you don't have to have 55 people. Show up with 10, 12 people, bring your kids, bring your nieces, bring your people that aren't even interested, like that might care about whatever, bring them and get signs, make t-shirts. It will change the game if you push hard.
I would also say that, you know, we've never had better access to progressive zoning codes across the country. When I say like steal the best examples, if you're a citizen advocate or you're a planner in a municipality, it's very easy kind of to study what other cities are doing, to see how codes are organized, to see how standards are illustrated and communicated, and to learn from the experience of other municipalities in applying codes they've already adopted. I would say whether you're a citizen or a practitioner, be informed about how zoning codes have been or have not been effective in other places. And there are so many great examples now to learn from that you can go toe to toe with any policymakers about these issues. It's not as complicated as it seems.
Learning some of the lingo is important, but it's not that hard.
Remember that all those pretty postcards of Maine downtowns were done when zoning didn't exist. So everyday people almost instinctively knew how to create these places. We're still learning the art of restoring and rebuilding our cities, but we still need rules to help guide people to a good outcome. And but it's not as complicated as it seems.
I think this is going to come close to our last question. So Ken's asking, does your code allow tiny homes on small undeveloped lots?
Mm-hmm. Yes. In measuring our city, we looked at the 94,000 parcels all across the city of Buffalo and determined what the smallest and largest lots were. And we designed standards that reflect the existing lot dimensions in each neighborhood and zone in the city, and also allowed for any pre-existing lot that is non-conforming even to those very liberal standards to be built upon as long as the setback and height requirements are met. So there's examples of new houses being built on lots as small as 22 feet. We've got some row houses being built on lots of 15 feet. And the setback requirements, which are really critical if you're really aiming to create or mimic a compact environment, to match those existing historic dimensions. So when you go out and you measure your city, you get out the measuring tape and you see exactly what the distance is between buildings, the distance from the front of the building to the front lot line and the rear lot line. Look at how much of the buildings that exist in your historic neighborhoods occupy the lot. And you know, all those dimensional characteristics of your historic neighborhoods need to be reflected in your zoning code to the greatest extent possible. And if you do that, then building small homes with small lots, building accessory dwelling units, which is allowed now in the code for the first time in 63 years, that all becomes possible. And I promise you that if you do it, you're going to see a lot more.
How many units do you guys
development? Say again?
I was just going to ask, how many residential units do you allow per lot?
It depends on the zone.
Mm-hmm.
So in mixed use and downtown zones, there are no density limits. The form requirements are the density limits. You can put as many units as you want into a building envelope that meets the code standards.
That's right.
We do have, and that's most of the city. We do have some multifamily zones with very loose density requirements, and we exempt doubles, singles, and accessory dwelling units from those standards. So what we found, even in multifamily zones that allow for, or that have some modest density standards, is that you can get around them by building a double unit with a detached accessory dwelling unit. So one developer in particular, they're actually a group of twins in their late 20s, are developing narrow lot double houses with an accessory dwelling unit in the back. Super efficient model for home ownership. They've built about 6 of them so far, taking advantage of those loopholes. And but depending on the area of the lot, for multifamily or larger, there are some requirements that have basically legalized about 80% of all the buildings in our residential neighborhoods. But as I mentioned, in mixed use and downtown zones, there are no density limitations.
Yeah, try telling an investor that there are no density limitations and their brains then explode. Like any real estate person's like, excuse me, what? Like, what do you mean? That can't be right. And it's like, no, we can put as many apartments in this building that we want. And it's just, it's mind blowing.
The few limitations the code does have actually came in at the last minute. There was some controversy with a few things, and that was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we took the existing multifamily buildings that we found were commonplace in all those residential neighborhoods and matched the density restrictions to those, so that communities could have some visual expectation of what density would look like based on building examples we could provide in presentations we made to the community. Those were ultimately adopted. And by the way, the goal of a form-based code shouldn't simply be to allow as much density as possible. You need to study what your community looks like. What are the great historic examples? What buildings do people like? What do they find acceptable? What can they envision can be replicated in new construction based on those historic examples? And use those historic examples as the basis for code writing. I would imagine that in small towns in Maine, the goal isn't necessarily to have in denser neighborhoods where the predominant pattern is 2.5 or 3-story buildings tightly packed, to suddenly allow 5-story, 200-foot long buildings, which are commonplace in many communities. You can design density and form standards to match your existing character.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you. Huge thanks to Chris and Bernice and to all of the attendees for your fantastic questions and all of the work you're doing locally. Please remember to sign up for your professional development credits. We will drop the form in the chat box. Please join us next week for CADE's talk. Again, we have the informal coffee talk at 9:30, so you can drop in. Please let us know if you have any projects that you'd like to highlight, and we will have CADE speaking at 10 a.m. So look forward to seeing you next week, and thanks so much.
Thanks, you guys.